In the quiet hush of the afternoon, when the sun stretched long, golden fingers across the living room floor, a world of sound would come alive. It wasn't a loud world, but a deep one, centered around a slightly out-of-tune upright piano that stood against the far wall. The piano was old, its wood scarred with the ghosts of past owners, and some of its ivory keys were worn smooth and yellowed. To most, it was just a piece of furniture, but to the 7-year-old boy with the serious, concentrated eyes, it was a universe waiting to be explored. He wasn't a typical 7-year-old. While other kids in the neighborhood were outside, their shouts and laughter echoing in the streets, he would often be found on the small wooden bench, his feet dangling high above the pedals. His parents would watch him from the doorway, a mixture of awe and gentle concern on their faces. They weren't musicians themselves. His father fixed cars, his hands always stained with grease, and his mother was a nurse, her touch gentle and healing. They understood hard work and dedication, but the way their son connected with the piano was something else entirely, a form of magic they couldn't quite name. He never had formal lessons at first. He just knew. One day, his mother had hummed a simple lullaby she remembered from her own childhood. A few hours later, she heard the same melody drifting from the living room, not perfectly, but recognizably, played by two small hands that seemed to move on their own. From that day on, the house was filled with music. He would hear a jingle on a television commercial and, moments later, figure it out on the piano, adding his own little flourishes and harmonies. He didn't just copy the sounds. He understood them. He once told his mother that the note C felt like the color yellow, like sunshine, and that a minor chord was like a cloudy day. A little sad but still nice. It was his secret language, seeing this raw, untamed talent. His parents scraped together their savings and enrolled him with the best piano teacher they could find, a woman known in the local music community simply as Madame Dubois. She was a formidable figure, tall and thin, with silver hair pulled back into a tight, severe bun. She never smiled, not really, but her eyes, sharp and intelligent, would sometimes soften with a flicker of approval. Her studio was a stark contrast to the boy's warm, sunlit living room. It was a place of discipline, of metronomes ticking like stern hearts, and of scales played over and over until they were perfect. Madame Dubois believed in a foundation. She believed that before a person could create art, they had to master the craft. For the boy, this meant endless hours of finger exercises, learning the proper posture and understanding the complex mathematics of music theory. He was a good student, obedient and respectful. He played his scales flawlessly, his fingers dancing across the keys with a precision that delighted her. But sometimes in the middle of a simple Czerny etude, a stray, beautiful melody would sneak in, a piece of his own soul shining through. Madame Dubois would immediately stop him. "No," she would say, her voice firm but not unkind. "We play what is on the page. The notes are enough. Do not add what is not there." He would nod, tucking his creative spirit away, and play the piece as written. But the music inside him was like a river, and it was always looking for a way to flow around the dam of her strict rules. It was on a rainy Tuesday, while waiting for his lesson to begin, that he first heard it. Madame Dubois was running late, and he was left alone in the small, dusty waiting area outside her studio. Beside a stack of old music magazines was a heavy wooden door, always kept closed. Curiosity, that powerful driver of so many things, got the better of him. He turned the cold, brass knob and peeked inside. It was an archive, a library of forgotten things. The air smelled of old paper and dust, and the shelves were crammed with stacks of sheet music and boxes of old vinyl records. In the corner there was a small, portable record player with a pair of heavy headphones. He wandered in, running his small fingers along the spines of books with titles like Advanced Counterpoint and The History of the Baroque Sonata. Then he saw a box of records tucked away under a table. The records weren't in proper sleeves, just stacked loosely. He pulled one out. The label was plain, almost homemade, with just a few words typed on it. Alaric, The Tempest's Heart. He had never heard of a composer named Alaric. Carefully, he pulled the record from its paper sleeve. It was black and shiny, and when he held it to the light, He could see the fine grooves that held the music. He placed it on the turntable, gently lowered the needle, and put on the large headphones. At first, there was only the soft crackle and pop of dust in the grooves. Then the music began. It wasn't like anything he had ever heard before. It started with a few lonely, haunting notes, like raindrops on a window pane. But then it exploded. A torrent of sound crashed through the headphones, a chaotic, beautiful storm of crashing chords and melodies that seemed to be chasing each other. It was angry and sad, powerful and delicate, all at the same time. His hands, resting on his lap, began to twitch, his fingers mimicking the impossible patterns he was hearing. The music was a puzzle, a challenge, a story told in a language he didn't know but somehow understood. It was the most difficult, the most complicated, the most beautiful thing he had ever experienced. He sat there, completely lost, until the final, thundering chord faded into silence, leaving only the sound of his own heart beating in his ears. When his lesson finally started, he was buzzing with an excitement he could barely contain. He had to know more. As soon as the lesson was over, he gathered his courage. "Madame Dubois?" he asked, his voice small. "I heard a piece of music today. It was called The Tempest's Heart by a man named Alaric." The teacher, who was wiping down the piano keys, stopped. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "The Tempest's Heart?" she repeated, the words sounding heavy in her mouth. "Where did you hear that?" "It was on a record in the back room," he explained quickly. "It was, amazing." Madame Dubois let out a short, sharp sigh. She walked over to the window and looked out, her back to him. "That is not music, child," she said, her voice colder than he had ever heard it. "It is a technical nightmare. A piece of arrogance by a composer who hated pianists. He wrote things that are physically impossible for the human hand to play." She turned around, her eyes like stone. "It is famously unplayable. A fool's errand. Forget you ever heard it. It is a waste of your time and your talent." Her words hit him like a physical blow. A waste of time? Unplayable? But he had heard it. He had felt it. It wasn't a nightmare. It was a story, a whole world of feeling. To him, it wasn't about what was possible or impossible for the hands. It was about what the music wanted to say. He stood there, speechless, as she began to pack her bag, the discussion clearly over. But as he walked out of the studio and into the cool evening air, the melody of The Tempest's Heart was already playing in his mind, a whisper of the impossible that he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul he would one day bring to life. The walk home from his lesson was a quiet one. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, but the boy barely noticed. His mind was a storm, replaying Madame Dubois's words over and over. A technical nightmare, a fool's errand, unplayable. Each phrase was a small, sharp stone thrown at the beautiful, fragile thing he had discovered in the dusty archive. But instead of shattering his newfound passion, her words had done something unexpected. They had hardened it, turning a simple fascination into a quiet, burning defiance. She saw a wall of impossibility. He saw a challenge. She heard a mistake. He heard a story that needed to be told. That night he barely touched his dinner. His mother, a woman with a kind face and eyes that missed nothing, placed a gentle hand on his forehead. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart? You're 1,000,000 miles away." "I'm okay, Mom," he mumbled, pushing a pea around his plate with his fork. "Just thinking about music." It wasn't a lie, not really. But the music he was thinking about was a secret now, a treasure he had to hide. His secret obsession needed a map, and he knew where to find one. The next day, after school, he rode his bike to the other side of town, to a street lined with old, brick-fronted shops. There was a second-hand store there, a cluttered wonderland of forgotten things. The bell above the door jingled a cheerful, out-of-tune welcome as he stepped inside. The air smelled of old books and dusty fabric. He went straight to the back where a jumbled pile of sheet music was kept in a wooden crate. He dug through it, his small hands tossing aside simple folk songs and beginner's manuals. And then he saw it. Tucked between two tattered copies of Easy Classics for Piano was a thin, cream-colored booklet. The title was printed in elegant, fading black letters, The Tempest's Heart, Op. 47, below it the name Alaric. His heart gave a little leap. He clutched it to his chest and took it to the counter, using the crumpled bills from his weekly allowance to pay for it. Back in his room, he carefully placed the booklet on his desk and opened it. The sight of the music on the page was both thrilling and terrifying. It was exactly as he had imagined it, even more so. The notes weren't just notes. They were a teeming, chaotic swarm. They climbed on top of each other, dense and black, with sharp, jagged lines shooting across the page. There were so many notes stacked on top of each other that it looked like the composer had just dropped handfuls of ink onto the paper. He saw chords that seemed to require 10 fingers and passages that flew up and down the staff so fast they looked like a blur. It was a map of a mountain no one thought he could climb. He knew he couldn't practice this in the open. Madame Dubois would find out, and his parents, while supportive, would worry. So he became a creature of the early morning. His alarm clock, usually set for 7, was now quietly set for 5. Every morning, in the deep blue quiet before the world woke up, he would slip out of his bed. He moved like a ghost through the dark house, his bare feet silent on the cool floor. In the living room, his piano waited to keep the sound from traveling. He had an idea. He took the thick, heavy comforter from his bed and draped it over the strings inside the upright piano, carefully lifting the lid. It wouldn't silence it completely, but it would muffle the sound, turning the bright, clear tones into something soft and thumpy like a heartbeat, and then the work began. He would place the sheet music on the stand, the pale light from the street lamp outside just enough to illuminate the impossible notes. He started not at the beginning, but with the hardest part he could find, a dizzying cascade of notes that ran up the keyboard like a waterfall. He tried to play it. His fingers, which could dance so nimbly through his scales, suddenly felt clumsy and large. They tripped over each other, landing on the wrong keys, producing a discordant mess that was nothing like the beautiful storm he had heard on the record. Frustration pricked at his eyes. He tried again. And again. The notes were a jumble, his hands refusing to cooperate. His arms began to ache from the awkward stretches. This was the technical nightmare Madame Dubois had talked about. For a moment, a wave of doubt washed over him. What if she was right? What if this was just a silly, impossible dream? But then he closed his eyes and remembered the sound from the record. He remembered the feeling it gave him, the sense of a story being told. He wasn't just trying to hit the right notes. He was trying to tell that story. He broke the waterfall down. Instead of trying to play the whole thing, he just looked at the first 4 notes. He played them slowly, one at a time. Then again, a little faster. Then he added the next 4. He spent the entire first week just on that one small passage, practicing it in the muffled darkness until his fingers knew it by memory. This became his routine. Wake up at 5. Practice his secret piece for an hour. Go back to bed for an hour. Get up for school. His life began to feel like it was split in 2. There was the daytime boy, the one who went to school, did his homework and played the simple, correct pieces for Madame Dubois. And there was the dawn boy, the one who wrestled with a tempest in the quiet of the living room. His parents started to notice the change. He was often tired, his eyelids drooping over his cereal bowl. His mother found him once, asleep at his desk, his head resting on his arm next to the open sheet music. She gently covered him with a blanket, her heart aching with a nameless worry. She saw the new calluses forming on his small fingers, harder and tougher than they should be for a boy playing simple etudes. When she asked him about it, he just mumbled that he was practicing a lot, just as Madame Dubois wanted. He hated lying, but he didn't know how to explain the fierce, private world he was building. Note by painful note, his lessons with Madame Dubois became an exercise in acting. He would play his assigned pieces, his fingers obedient and precise. But his mind was elsewhere. While playing a simple Mozart melody, his fingers would sometimes twitch, wanting to leap into a furious arpeggio from The Tempest's Heart. Madame Dubois would stop him. Focus, your mind is wandering. Where are you today? Nowhere, he would say, his eyes fixed on the simple notes on the page. But he was somewhere. He was in his secret world, a world of storms and secrets, a world where a 7-year-old boy was trying to do the impossible, one muffled note at a time. He was no longer just playing the piano. He was on a quest, and the quiet determination in his heart was stronger than any doubt. The world inside the boy's head had two separate soundtracks. There was the daytime music, the simple, clear melodies from his lesson books, the cheerful tunes he played for his parents, the happy songs he heard on the radio. And then there was the dawn music, the secret music of the tempest's heart. It was a language only he and the old piano spoke, a conversation held in the quiet blue hours before the sun came up. His secret practice was starting to pay off. The waterfall of notes that had once been a jumbled mess was now beginning to flow. His fingers, though still small, were learning the impossible stretches. They were developing a memory of their own, finding the right keys even when his eyes were closed. He could now play whole sections of the piece, not perfectly, but with a growing confidence. He was no longer just fighting the notes. He was starting to conduct the storm. One afternoon, his father came home from work holding a brightly colored piece of paper. "Look what I saw on the community board at the grocery store," he said, spreading it out on the kitchen table. It was a flyer for the annual regional youth music competition. There was a picture of a golden trophy and a list of categories. "You should think about entering," his father said, his voice full of encouragement. "You've been working so hard. You could play that nice little piece by Mozart, the one Madame Dubois is so proud of." His mother leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the page. "Oh, that would be wonderful, sweetheart. To play on a real stage. What do you think?" The boy looked at the flyer. His first thought was of the Mozart piece, safe and simple. But then another thought, a much bolder one, began to grow in his mind. He saw the flyer not as an opportunity to play a song everyone already knew he could play, but as a chance. A chance to give the tempest's heart a voice. A chance to prove Madame Dubois wrong. A chance to show the world what he heard in that dusty archive. The idea was terrifying, but it was also exciting, like looking down from the top of a very high diving board. "I'll think about it," he said quietly, folding the flyer and slipping it into his pocket. For the next 2 days, he carried that flyer with him everywhere. He took it out in his room at night, tracing the letters with his finger. He knew his parents would be happy if he chose the Mozart. He knew Madame Dubois would approve. But the music inside him, the secret, stormy music, was demanding to be heard. It felt less like a choice and more like a destiny. Finally, he made a decision. It was a quiet, secret act, just like his morning practice. He took the registration form from the bottom of the flyer. In his neatest handwriting, he filled in his name, his age, and his teacher's name. Then, in the space marked "Piece to be performed," he wrote the words that felt both powerful and dangerous. "The Tempest's Heart" by Alaric. He sealed it in an envelope and, on his way to school the next morning, dropped it into the big blue mailbox on the corner. It was done. There was no turning back. A week later, the phone rang during dinner. His father answered it, his cheerful "Hello?" slowly turning into a confused frown. "Yes, he's my son, but are you sure?" He listened for a long moment, his eyebrows knitted together. "I see. We'll talk to him. Thank you for calling." When he hung up, the room was silent. "That was the competition committee," he said, looking at the boy. "They wanted to confirm the piece you're playing. They said there might have been a mistake." The boy's heart began to beat a little faster. "There's no mistake," he said, his voice barely a whisper. His mother looked from her son to her husband, her face a mask of confusion. "What piece did you put down, sweetheart?" "The Tempest's Heart," he said, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. The next few days were a blur. The news, it seemed, had spread through the local music world like wildfire. The phone rang constantly. Other parents, whom they barely knew, called to express their concern. The director of the conservatory, where Madame Dubois taught, left a message questioning their judgment. "This is not a circus act," the man's stern voice said on the answering machine. It is a serious competition, and this decision is frankly irresponsible. Online forums for local musicians were filled with comments. Heard a 7-year-old is trying to play Alaric? His parents are setting him up for a public humiliation. It's a shame. Some people will do anything for attention. That piece should be banned from competitions. It's not music, it's an exercise in cruelty. The boy, who had been so focused on the music, was suddenly faced with the reality of what he had done. He hadn't done it for attention. He had done it for the song, but now he felt like he had done something wrong. He saw the worry on his parents' faces, the way they spoke in hushed, worried tones when they thought he wasn't listening. He felt very small and very alone. The final blow came at his next lesson. He walked into the studio, and he knew immediately that she knew. Madame Dubois was standing by the window, her back to him, her posture rigid as a statue. She didn't turn around when he entered. "So," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "the Tempest's heart." She turned, and her eyes were flashing with a cold fire he had never seen before. "Did you think this was funny? A little joke to play on your teacher? On the entire music community?" "No," he stammered, his hands trembling. I wanted to play it." "You wanted to play it," she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You have no idea what you have done. Do you know that people are laughing? They are laughing at me. They are laughing at your parents. And soon, if you go through with this, they will be laughing at you. On a stage. In front of everyone." She walked over to the piano and slammed the lid shut with a loud bang that made him jump. "This is not a game. This is my reputation. Your future. You will not make a mockery of it." She knelt down, bringing her face close to his. Her eyes were not just angry. They were hurt. "I am giving you an ultimatum," she said, her voice low and firm. "You will call the committee tomorrow. You will tell them you made a mistake. You will change your piece to the Mozart, or I will withdraw as your teacher. You will be on your own." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Without her, he had no official teacher, no sponsor for the competition. He would be completely alone. He felt a hot tear escape and run down his cheek. He looked at her, at the woman who had taught him so much, and saw only a wall of disappointment. He wanted to agree, to say yes, to make it all stop. But then he thought of the long, quiet hours in the dawn. He thought of the music, the beautiful, angry, sad, wonderful music that was finally starting to sing under his fingers. He thought of the long-dead composer, Alaric, whose name was being called a joke. He looked back at Madame Dubois, his own fear slowly being replaced by a quiet, stubborn resolve. He didn't say anything. He just shook his head. It was a small gesture, but it was the most defiant thing he had ever done. He had chosen his path. He was a 7-year-old boy, standing alone against a wall of adult skepticism, with nothing but a piano and an impossible song to protect him. The day of the competition arrived under a sky the color of pale, washed-out blue. Inside the house, the air was thick with a quiet, unspoken tension. His mother had made him his favorite breakfast, but he could only manage a few bites. The food felt like cardboard in his mouth. His father, usually a man of easy smiles and loud laughter, was silent, his hands gripping his coffee mug a little too tightly. They had asked him one last time, the night before, if he was sure. He had just nodded, his eyes fixed on the worn sheet music lying on his nightstand. There was nothing more to say. The decision had been made. The drive to the concert hall was a blur. The boy sat in the back seat, watching the familiar streets of his town rush by, but he wasn't really seeing them. He was seeing the notes of The Tempest's Heart, black and sharp, dancing behind his eyes. He was feeling the music in his bones, a nervous energy that made his legs bounce up and down. His parents didn't turn on the radio. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the soft, rhythmic squeak of the windshield wipers, clearing away a few stray drops of rain. It felt like the world was holding its breath. The concert hall was bigger than he had ever imagined. It was a giant, cavernous space, with a ceiling so high it was lost in shadows and rows of red velvet seats that seemed to go on forever. Backstage was a maze of narrow corridors and heavy velvet curtains. It smelled of dust and old wood, and the air buzzed with a nervous energy. Other children were there, too, all dressed in their best clothes. They were running scales on small keyboards, their parents fussing with their collars and hair. They all seemed so confident, so prepared. He felt like an outsider, a spy who had wandered into the wrong party. He was the only one who wasn't warming up. His music was too big, too wild for this small, quiet space. It was a caged tiger, and he was waiting for the moment to open the door. A man with a clipboard called his name. It was time. His parents knelt down in front of him. His mother straightened his bow tie, her hands trembling slightly. "We are so proud of you, no matter what happens," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. His father just put a strong, warm hand on his shoulder and squeezed. He didn't need to say anything. The boy could feel all the love and support in that simple gesture. Then he followed the man with the clipboard toward the side of the stage. The heavy curtain parted, just enough for him to slip through. And suddenly he was standing on the edge of a vast wooden ocean. The stage was huge, and in the center, under a single bright spotlight, sat a grand piano that looked like a sleek black monster. It was much bigger than his old upright at home. Beyond the edge of the stage he could see the sea of faces, hundreds of them, all looking at him. The murmur of the crowd was a low, constant rumble, like distant thunder. He felt his heart begin to pound against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet of his own body. He took a step, and then another, his small dress shoes making soft, echoing sounds on the wooden floor. It felt like the longest walk of his life. As he got closer to the piano, he scanned the front row, and then he saw her, Madame Dubois. She was sitting ramrod straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her face was a mask of stone, her lips pressed into a thin, unforgiving line. She wasn't there to support him. She was there to witness his failure. Seeing her, a strange calm washed over him. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was joined by something else. A spark of the same quiet defiance that had made him shake his head in her studio. He was not just playing for the judges or the crowd anymore. He was playing for her. He climbed onto the bench and adjusted its height. His feet dangled, far from the pedals. He placed his sheet music on the stand, though he knew he wouldn't really need it. The notes were inside him now. He took a deep breath, the air smelling of wood polish and anticipation. He placed his fingers on the keys, cool and smooth beneath his touch. The murmur of the crowd began to fade as people settled in their seats. Curious to see what this little boy would do, he began to play. The first few notes were hesitant, soft, and questioning. They were like the first few drops of rain before a storm. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats, a quiet whisper of disappointment. It was just a child, after all. But then he closed his eyes, and the world outside the piano disappeared. There was only him and the keys and the music. The soft notes began to grow, to gather strength. A melody emerged, lonely and haunting, and it seemed to silence the few remaining whispers in the hall. Then it happened. The first crash? A thunderous chord that seemed to come out of nowhere, shaking the very air in the room. It was a physical sound, a jolt that made people sit up straight in their seats. The boy's small hands, which had looked so delicate just moments before, were now striking the keys with a power and fury that seemed impossible. The chaos had begun. His fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion. The music was a storm, just as he had always heard it. It was a whirlwind of sound, with melodies chasing each other like frantic birds and harmonies crashing against each other like waves in a raging sea. He wasn't just hitting the right notes. He was telling a story. He played with a passion that was raw and real, his body swaying with the music, his face a canvas of emotion. In the front row, Madame Dubois's stony expression began to crack. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Her hands, once neatly folded, were now gripping the arms of her chair. The judges, who had been leaning back with looks of professional skepticism, were now leaning forward, their pens forgotten on the table. They were no longer judges critiquing a performance. They were an audience, completely captivated. The piece moved through its journey. There were moments of delicate beauty where the melody sang with a heartbreaking sadness, so soft and clear it was like the quiet after the rain. Then the fury would return even more intense than before. It was a battle, a conversation between anger and sorrow, between chaos and order. The boy was no longer just a player. He was a conduit. He was channeling the ghost of the long-dead composer, giving voice to a music that had been silent for 100 years. He was proving that it wasn't unplayable. It had just been waiting for someone who believed in it enough. He reached the final climactic passage. A series of chords that built and built, each one more powerful than the last, rising to a peak of impossible tension. The entire hall was holding its breath, every person caught in the grip of the storm. And then he brought his hands down one last time. A single, thunderous final chord that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. And then, silence. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a profound, heavy silence that filled the hall, pressing down on everyone. It lasted for 3 full seconds. The boy sat with his hands still on the keys, his eyes closed, his chest heaving. He was lost in the echo of the music. And then the silence was broken. It started with one person, then another, and then suddenly it was an explosion. The entire hall erupted in a roar of sound, a deafening wave of applause that was so loud it was almost physical. People were on their feet, clapping, shouting, "Bravo!" Tears streamed down the faces of strangers in the audience. The boy opened his eyes, blinking in the bright light, a dazed and confused look on his face. He looked out at the sea of standing, cheering people, and then he looked to the front row. Madame Dubois was on her feet too. Her hands were clapping fiercely, and tears were streaming down her face. She wasn't looking at him as a student who had disobeyed her. She was looking at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. He had done it. The 7-year-old boy had tamed the tempest. The roar of the crowd was a physical thing, a wall of sound that crashed over him, pulling him out of the deep, quiet place where the music had lived. For a moment he just sat there, his small hands still resting on the keys, his mind trying to catch up with what had just happened. He could see the faces, a blur of emotion, all turned toward him. They were standing, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. He felt a hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm. It was the man with the clipboard who was now smiling broadly. He helped the boy stand up, and the applause seemed to get even louder. The boy gave a small, awkward bow, just as he had seen people do in movies. He felt dizzy, his legs shaky, as if he had just run a very long race. He was lead off the stage, back into the maze of corridors backstage. The moment he was out of the spotlight, his parents were there. His mother swept him into a hug so tight he could barely breathe, her tears wetting his hair. "Oh, my sweet boy," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." His father knelt down, his eyes shining with a pride so bright it was almost overwhelming. He didn't say anything at first, just wrapped his arms around both of them, creating a small, safe circle of love in the middle of the chaos. Then he pulled back, looked his son right in the eyes, and said, "You were a giant up there." A giant. The boy felt a warmth spread through his chest, pushing away the last of the cold fear. He had done it. He had made them proud. As they stood there, a figure approached them. It was Madame Dubois. The boy felt his body tense up, expecting the anger, the disappointment he had seen so many times before. But her face was different. The stone was gone, melted away by something that looked a lot like wonder. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying too. She stopped a few feet away, looking at the boy, not as a disobedient student, but as something she had never seen before. "May I?" she asked his parents, her voice soft, a tone they had never heard from her. They nodded, and she stepped closer. She knelt down, bringing herself to his level, just as she had done in her studio that day. But this time, there was no fire in her eyes, only a deep, shimmering humility. "I was wrong," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but every word was clear. "I was so wrong. I told you that piece was a technical nightmare, a mistake. But tonight you didn't just play the notes. You gave them a soul. You didn't just play the storm. You were the storm. She reached out and gently took one of his hands, her own hand trembling slightly. I have been teaching for 40 years, and I have never heard anything like that. I have never felt anything like that. You didn't just play the piano, child. You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Forgive me. The boy looked at her, at the tears now freely streaming down her cheeks, and he saw not his old teacher, but a fellow musician humbled by the power of a song. He simply nodded, and a small, genuine smile broke across his face. Later, all the performers were gathered on the stage for the award ceremony. The boy stood with the other children, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in months. He didn't care about winning. He had already won his victory in the thunderous chords and the silent tears of his teacher. The judges came to the podium, their faces serious. They announced the third-place winner, then the second. Then, for the first-place award, the head judge took the microphone. This year, he began, his voice echoing in the now quiet hall, we were presented with a unique challenge. A performer who chose a piece that many in our profession consider unplayable, a piece of music that defies convention and pushes the very limits of human ability. While we have a first-place prize for technical excellence, we felt that tonight's performance required something more. It required a recognition not just of skill, but of courage, of artistic vision. Therefore, the judges have decided to create a new, one-time-only award this evening. The award for artistic courage. He looked directly at the boy. For a performance that reminded us that the greatest barriers in art are not in the notes on the page, but in the limits of our own belief. This award goes to the young man who played The Tempest's Heart. A new round of applause erupted, warm and genuine. He walked to the podium and accepted a small, golden plaque. It didn't have a number on it, just his name and the name of the award. It felt more real to him than any trophy could dot in the days that followed. The recording of his performance, made by a parent in the audience, found its way online. At first, it was shared among local music groups. But then something strange happened. It started to spread, passed from person to person, shared across continents. It wasn't just a story about a cute kid playing the piano anymore. It was a phenomenon. Famous concert pianists, people whose names were on the books he studied, posted videos of themselves reacting to his performance, their faces filled with astonishment. This is not just a prodigy, one wrote. This is a poet. The piece of music, The Tempest's Heart, was resurrected from its dusty obscurity. Music stores were flooded with requests for the sheet music. Pianists around the world began attempting it, no longer seeing it as an unplayable joke, but as a new benchmark of artistic expression. The long-dead composer Alaric was suddenly the subject of articles and documentaries, his genius finally recognized, a century after his death. But for the boy, life slowly returned to normal. The interviews and the attention faded, and he was once again just a 7-year-old boy. He went back to school, did his homework, and played with his friends. And he went back to his old upright piano in the sunlit living room. He still practiced his scales and his etudes, but now Madame Dubois encouraged him to explore, to add his own little flourishes, to follow the music wherever it led. She had become his biggest champion. Her strictness replaced by a deep, abiding respect. One afternoon, his mother found him in the living room, not playing The Tempest's Heart, but a simple, silly little tune he had made up himself. It was a happy song, full of sunshine and laughter. He was just playing, lost in the joy of creating something new. She watched him from the doorway, her heart full. He had conquered the storm, had shaken the world of classical music, and had brought a forgotten composer back to life. But in the end, he was still just her son, a boy with a serious, concentrated look on his face, whose hands could make magic on a piano. And she knew, with a certainty that filled her with peace, that for him, it had never been about proving the world wrong. It had always been about proving the music right.